Do you want to study abroad, but you're not sure how you're going to pay for it? In today's video, I'm going to give you 4 ideas on how to find scholarships for your study abroad dreams. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Kimber. I'm a study abroad specialist. I help high school, college, and graduate students all around the world realize their study abroad dreams. And if you're returning to the channel, welcome. I'm so excited to share this information with you. So we are talking all about scholarships today, specifically scholarships for study abroad. It doesn't matter what time of year you want to study abroad. Also doesn't really matter what type of program you're doing. I'm going to give you some ideas of where to look for scholarships. This is a big question. This is one of the questions I get all the time as I advise students, as I work with students of course, like where do they find money to study abroad? It doesn't mean that maybe their parents aren't helping them or they're not paying for some of it, but it can get really expensive. And so I want to share some ideas with you of where to begin seeking for scholarship money, because there's a lot of money out there. We don't want to be leaving any money on the table anywhere. That is not our style. If you're here on this channel with me, we like to get all the money as much as possible. So the first place that you can look for scholarship money for your study abroad programs is going to be directly through your school. Now, I know that it really depends on what type of program you're doing. We talk about different types of study abroad programs here, but a lot of students do study abroad either through their school specifically or through programs that their school recommends. So you want to start out with looking at your school as a potential source for funding. Now, you'll want to keep in mind that depending on what country you're coming from, this could look very different. So for example, if you're here in the US, a lot of students get financial aid that is applied to their regular schooling, but those scholarships may not necessarily transfer over to a study abroad opportunity. However, your school may have study abroad specific scholarships that you can apply for. Same thing if you're living outside the United States. It may be a situation where your school has allotted scholarship funds specifically for international studies. And so you want to research this. This is often an untapped source of funding because a lot of students just don't really think to ask. They may think to find out if their school offers any type of study abroad, but they don't always ask about the actual workings of scholarship money and the actual funding. So I would say to start out with your school, either asking a financial aid officer or even asking someone in the administration. Sometimes professors or teachers will also know as well, but someone who works closely with the budget can definitely tell you. So you will want to be able to find that information out. The other thing you will want to ask when you're figuring this information out is, what do I have to actually do to qualify? Because just because they have the scholarship, it doesn't mean that you qualify. So for example, do you have to have a certain GPA or a certain amount of grades to be able to do that? If you're in the UK, for example, do you need to have a first on everything to be able to do that? Do you also as well, are there certain things that would apply? So maybe you are someone who is first generation into your university or your college. Maybe that's a particular scholarship they have. Sometimes they have scholarships for people with various backgrounds. Maybe sometimes it's based on whatever particular secondary or high school you came from. So you want to look into all those things and definitely ask and figure out how that would actually be allotted. The other thing as well is that you want to make sure that they are clear about when you would be able to use it. There are some scholarships for study abroad that are only available to use in the summer. There are some that are only available to use either in the fall or spring. And there are some that may be allotted if you want to do, let's say, an exchange program. And so these are some of the things that you would definitely want to ask and dig into as you are checking with your school to see if they might be able to provide you with some type of funding scholarship wise for your particular study abroad program. And now I also just want to point out as well, I think that everyone knows this, but just keeping in mind that scholarships are great because they don't have to be paid back. It's not like a student loan. It's not even like a grant. A lot of times with grants are nice because they are also similar to scholarships, but with grants, there's a lot more weight behind it. A lot of times there's so much more commitment that you have to do. There's a lot more that goes into the application process a lot of time for grants. So it doesn't mean that grants are bad, but scholarships are often the most preferred type of financial aid for students, whether they are studying abroad or whether they're trying to get a degree, because it is essentially free money. And it does often have some situations where maybe you have to maintain a certain GPA or you have to make sure that you are doing certain conduct, but there's not as much of a stress with getting a scholarship compared to grants or student loans. So keep that in mind for sure. The next thing that you should do when you are looking for scholarships to study abroad is to apply for citizenship-based scholarships. So what do I mean by this? There are, and this could just be in the Western countries only, but I think that it even extends to places in the Far East and the Middle East as well, but definitely check to make sure that your country specifically does this. But most governments around the world, and this is very shocking, I know, as a US citizen, I'm shocked and a little bit sus. So when the US government is giving away anything, I'm like, what is really tied behind this? But there are, in most countries around the world, governments have an allotted amount of money to be able to help people do different things. And specifically when it comes to education, study abroad is one of those things. So it doesn't matter whether you are, again, in the US, in Canada, in the UK, there are certain scholarships you can apply for that are considered citizenship based, meaning that you are a citizen of the country, you want to go do an exchange program, study abroad program, some type of program that is going to be enriching and going to be outside of the country. So that is going to be a great way to do it. And again, this is similar to those school-based scholarships in the sense that it's often untapped. It's not something that a lot of students always just utilize. They're often just thinking about, well, I was going through the brochure and then I saw that this program offers a scholarship, and so this is a scholarship that I'm going to apply for. There's so, like I said before, so much money out there, and it's in places that you would not think. So I would say to head over to any type of website for your particular country's government that's going to be looking at any type of affair. So international affairs, it could be something where, like here in the US, the State Department or the equivalent of whatever that is in your country, there's going to be a lot of information there that talks about different scholarships. Now, I do want to point out the fact that, as you would imagine, it's not that no students know about this. So that means it can be very competitive, but you want to look at what the requirements are. And you never want to assume that something is competitive just because it's out there. Maybe it's advertised at a lot of different places. I know that this is something that a lot of US students struggle with because there is a little bit of sort of, I would say, more information bias or assumed bias that a lot of these types of scholarships, let's say in our country, get advertised at Ivy League schools and other places where a lot of students are not necessarily as privy to it. But you're just assuming that because they are going to these schools and they have an inside that they're going to be more eligible. We know that is not true. I will actually share a video where I talked about for one of the scholarships that a lot of students apply for, where they choose from a lot of different places. So you will definitely want to just keep that in mind, that as long as it's out there, you apply for it. That's what I always tell people. It doesn't mean that you are somehow out of it. Now, I want to say that you want to apply for it as long as you are qualified. So keyword qualified. If it's saying that, hey, you need this level, on your math score from a certain standardized test, or you need this ability to speak this language. I mean, if you are not falling under that particular category, then don't waste your time, because it does take a lot of time to apply. But if you feel like, hey, I fit the requirements, I can definitely do this, then get out there. Do not stop yourself. Find that confidence. If you need it, then email me and I will give it to you. But definitely make sure that you are looking at those government-based and citizenship model scholarships. There's a lot of them out there. And again, get that free money. If the government is giving it away, go and grab it, and then make sure that there are no tax liabilities, particularly for my Americans out there. Make sure that you can get the money and then you can run. So definitely check out those particular scholarships. I'm sure that it's going to be great for you as you discover that and you get forward with applying for those. So the next place that you can look for scholarships for your study abroad opportunities is going to be looking at more major focus. And when I say major, I mean like major based on whatever your particular major or area of study is going to be, looking at some of those governing bodies. So I know that a lot of people in STEM do this. I know that a lot of people who are in more creative arts do this, where they are looking at, let's say, I don't even know the names of the associations, but let's say there's the International Association of, I don't know, female engineers. That probably does exist. But I would just say that, you're looking at different bodies that might be important to what you're trying to do. That is going to be a great place to look at scholarships. There are always people, and it doesn't really matter what type of field you're in. I was just giving that as an example, but it doesn't matter what type of field you're in. There's likely an association. It could even be one that's local to you. It could be one that's local to your country. It could, like I said, be an international one. But these are people who they're looking to champion people who are in their field. And so it's going to be a great place to look. The other thing that I would say as well is that If it's not listed on the website, because sometimes if you're going to a website or you found information somewhere, it's not listed, I would still reach out to a contact at some of these governing bodies to ask them. Now, one of the most powerful things that you could actually do is just to ask. Sometimes people don't offer things because no one has ever asked. I've been in that situation a million times where I was the first person to ask, and they're like, yeah, you can go do that. No one ever asked before. So you definitely want to make sure that you are in a situation where, let's say you are interested in medicine, or you're doing something in the arts or whatever it is, and you come across, maybe you're even a member sometimes of an association, but I know a lot of younger people are not members of associations quite yet, but maybe you know about different arts associations or whatever it's going to be related to your field of interest, and you know about them, and you go to their website and you're trying to figure out, well, they don't list anything about scholarships. Reach out to someone that you think could help you. Maybe it's someone in marketing or someone, whoever's going to be listed on the website that you're like, yeah, that sounds like they could probably help me. Email them. I would say to email them first. Don't pick up the phone and call them. Like, you don't just want to call them out of the blue. Send them a really nice email and ask them, do they provide any scholarships, or do they know of any other similar organizations that might do that within your particular field? Let them know what you're trying to do, and it can be a lot of ways to find sort of that hidden money. Again, a lot of times people don't get what they want because they just simply haven't asked. And again, you assume that because you don't see it listed that it's not there, when really maybe they do have someone who just donated money and they're like, yeah, they could probably give you a scholarship, but we didn't know anyone wanted it. So definitely reach out to people. Make sure, again, that you're being cordial, you're letting them know what you're doing. And again, even if they come back and say, hey, we don't offer any scholarships, we don't know anyone that does, just make sure that you're building those relationships and then move on to the next. There's lots of different roads that you can take with this. So I definitely want you to be, again, a little bit more creative. I think that one of the things I try to stress with the students that I work with is to, and this comes off very harsh, but to not be so basic. Because what people do is they just take everything for face value. And again, I say this as someone who's a lot older than most of the students I work with, and it comes from experience and living so many places and doing so many things, but you have to not be so basic. And so that means that maybe when you're on Google, you're not on page 1, you're on page 15. Like, you have to really think of it that way. You really have to dig deep. Now, one of the great things about working with someone like me is that I have a lot more insight into a lot of different things. And so if we are working together, I can sort of point you down some of the pathways. But you definitely want to, when you're doing your research on anything, but especially when it comes to things like scholarships, people tend to see like, ooh, bright, shiny money. It was on page 1, or I saw it in the library, and that's the one I'm going with. It's like, you really have to dig deep, because sometimes you really can find things that are more hidden, but you really have to be digging for them and looking for them. And I would say when it comes to doing something like study abroad or just education in general, it gets more expensive by the day, no matter what country you're living in and what country you're trying to go to. So definitely find that money and just dig deep to make sure that you can do that. So last but not least, I wanted to talk about time-sensitive scholarships. So you're like, well, aren't all scholarships time sensitive? Yes and no. So there are some scholarships that are just kind of rotating. They just have like a open policy, and then when people apply, they evaluate and then they move forward. But for time sensitive, I really mean based on when you want to study abroad. So this really goes down to looking at quarters or semesters, or if you are doing a longer term program, maybe you're doing a full degree program, then what does that actually look like? So this is going to be much more tied to when you actually want to study abroad. So there are some scholarships which focus on just students who want to study abroad during the traditional fall months. There are some scholarships which only have availability for students who want to do a Maymester. If you have not learned about Maymester, definitely watch the video that I'm going to link above for that. But you want to look at these time sensitive ones, because this can be good, particularly if you are a student who you're trying to narrow down, when do I want to study abroad? And you're like, hey, if I could get this scholarship during the spring, then I am off to France and I will see everyone later. So you definitely want to look at those time sensitive ones. Again, when you start out by reaching out to the contacts at your school, they will probably give you some of that information. But even if you don't end up getting any details back from them, look at that and see if that's going to impact you in any way. For some students, they don't really care that much about the time sensitivity. They're like, I'm flexible when I can go. But I know for a lot of students, they're like, no, I can only go in this semester or this quarter. Also, as well, if you are doing a full term, kind of long term degree, you're going to get your bachelor's abroad or whenever, then you definitely just want to look at the time sensitivity in terms of what the deadline is. Because for a lot of students, depending on where you're going to, what country you're going to, there may be one for the fall intake, which is the September to December, and then there may be one for the January intake. And so you want to be very clear about when those deadlines are. You can't just assume that because you apply and you get into the school and then you're like, hey, I want to start in January, that particular scholarship is going to be available. Sometimes they have specific windows of when that can be applied, and so you want to be very clear about that. So one of the things that I want you to do is, if you have not heard about the Fulbright scholarship in particular, it is one that is time sensitive, but it also too is open to a lot of different citizens from around the world. So I want you to watch this video to learn more about Fulbright specifically. I will see you over there.